He's been,
What's that?
he's been getting the Zoom set up, so I
Okay.
don't know yet. Guy right there.
I would want to. Right. Yeah, you should be recording on YouTube.
Okay, and I don't see Jock, so I'm gonna go ahead and start the meeting then.
Yes, ask Karen if she can still hear us. Karen, can you still hear us all right?
Absolutely, I'm good. Thank
We
you.
can't hear you, but
Can't hear Karen.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
it might be on our end, Karen. Hang on.
And Karen, I can hear you.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
There we go.
Can y'all hear me now? Only Julian can hear me?
No, I think we're good now.
Okay, okay, great.
All right, so I will call this regular audit committee meeting together. It's 9 a.m. on the 7th of July, 2025. And just wanted to note that we've got Julian Metcalf with us from GPP and Karen Curtin from Forvis Mazers. Am I saying that correct?
It's just fine. That'll work.
Online as well, and present are Commissioners Winfield, myself, and Commissioner Martinez here with our Administrator, Mark Tyner. And we can go ahead and get started off here with item number 1, which is an introduction with our new internal auditor. Julian, we're looking forward to getting some things started with you, and I'll let you give us just a little brief summary if you want to.
Gladly. Well, I'm real honored to be here. My name is Julian Metcalf, and I'm with GPP Analytics. As you know by now, we're a boutique firm. We're a small team focused on state and local government, working on internal performance audit. We do a number of special studies too, but audit is really our focus in this area. We work with a variety of jurisdictions, and we're real excited to work with you. We've done a lot of work with larger jurisdictions, but almost all of us are from smaller communities. And it's been our key interest to work with smaller communities and find out how to make sure that we can bring these services to everyone and scale it by leveraging some of our multiple clients and economies of scale with that. So I have handfuls of questions for you folks because I haven't had a chance to meet with you, but I don't want to start rambling, so I'll hold them for later, and you might already have answers to them. So that's just my brief introduction.
Well, we appreciate it and we look forward to it. I don't mind. I would say let's start off with some questions if you have any, and we'll go through and see if we can answer them, and if we're kind of all on the same page, and then maybe after that, we'll kind of have a discussion here on the direction that there's probably several directions we need to take off into, but.
Great. Well, maybe this helps frame the conversation. And this could be a failure of my research, and I wasn't able to find it, but I couldn't find what the previous internal audit work, what standards it was done under. And maybe it wasn't done under a standard. And there's really 2 primary internal audit standards in local government. There's the IIA, the Institute of Internal Auditors. And I don't want to throw too many acronyms at you, but they've got a whole host of acronyms underneath those standards. And then there's the Government Accountability Office at the federal level. And they have something that's generally called the Yellow Book, or GAGAS, Generally Accepted Government Accountability, or audit, sorry, too many acronyms, auditing standards. We work with both of those standards, and they're very similar. The IA one is used across multiple sectors, including the public sector, and then the Yellow Book or GAGAS is really public sector specific. But both are quite adaptable, and when you look at the fine print of each and put them side by side, there aren't too many meaningful differences. I think it's important to consider this if you haven't looked at audit standards before, because it adds to the credibility of the work. It does add layers of bureaucracy and some additional things to consider. But I think we could do it if you don't already have something in place, really starting with an audit committee charter and then some simple infrastructure around that we could really piggyback off of our existing firm's infrastructure. We're already doing the CP and the training and all the requirements, and you'd really just benefit from being part of that with us as a group. If you weren't interested in audit standards, and I could understand different reasons why an apprehension around that, I would say that we should be careful not to call anything internal audit does an audit. It could be a special study, there could be reviews, but I would be apprehensive about calling something an audit that's not done in accordance with one of the standards. So there's ways forward. But that's a number of questions. What direction you'd like to take with that? What you've already done? You may already have done some work in this area, so I don't want to be presumptuous at all. So that's one major question. I've done as much review as I could around some of the prior activity with the county and some of the challenges folks have faced and some of the things I've been able to dig up from the media and prior audit reports. I have a lot of specific questions about that. It's probably not appropriate to go into all of those, but where you're interested in with the enterprise risk assessment, which is a great thing that you're already talking about that because that's aligned with the audit standards. I'd be really curious where you see the biggest risk today, what you've already remediated, where you've fixed things, or at least feel that you fixed things, and what's on your minds about risk moving forward. Because the past may just be that, maybe the past, or maybe some of these things haven't been fully managed.
Okay.
So those are two categories.
I'll speak to the first one, and I just briefly went through our RFP that was put out, and I don't see it requesting either standard. I would say that we definitely would agree with you that we would like to go with a standard unless you could tell me a reason why we wouldn't. Let's see, Jock just texted and said he's trying to figure out how to zoom in, so I'm not sure of what that means, but I would say that we would want to weigh those out, and Karen is on, for lack of a better word, retainer as a financial expert to advise us. So I would, want some input from her on which one of those that she would recommend if we were going to take one. And so just working with the three of us, I'd say we'd want to come up with a plan because I don't see a reason against it, but neither is this my expertise.
So I appreciate that. So Julian, what would you see as the benefit with going with the GAGAS, the generally accepted government auditing standards? And I guess, are we talking about the consulting? Are we talking about consulting standards versus audit? I mean, they have a financial statement auditor.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So in internal audit, just traditionally, and there's exceptions to this, they have been moving towards having one standard or the other, the GAGAS or IAA standards. You can do consulting underneath those, but generally, if you're going to call something an internal audit or internal audit report, at least among my peers, and this is a really self-policing environment, there's no, well, some states have it. I don't believe Utah does. But most jurisdictions, they choose to opt into this. And it is really comes down to credibility and some amount of assurance to the public that things are done with a degree of independence and objectivity. And I could go on a philosophical rant about how those things are difficult to achieve, but the idea is to aspire towards them and to build a structure that gets as close as you can to true objectivity so that the things that come out of an internal audit function have the assurance and credibility that it was done independently, evidence-based, through folks with enough ongoing education and experience and exposure to be credible. And then there's a peer review that gets done of that. And that's one of the areas where I say, well, we're already as a firm doing a peer review, and we could just include anything with the county under that umbrella. And we might need to carve it out a little bit and say, okay, look at our firm-wide things and then do a special review of Grand County. But we could include that in, and the benefit to you would be that we don't have to do a separate peer review. which of course costs money and time from folks. So that's the benefit is our audit work would be reviewed under these standards under GAGAS every 3 years, under IAA every 5 years. Same idea though. They get reviewed by outsiders and say, yes, you're following the rules and following the standards.
So it's the firm as a whole, to clarify, that gets the peer review. It's not Grand County's work specifically.
Correct. But
Right, so-
I think we would probably want to, when we do our firm peer review, we might ask for a separate letter saying that the work specifically for Grand County,
Mm.
we would handle that. I'm just thinking maybe that's the better alternative to say, well, have one separate peer review statement about it, just so that we have that added credibility. But I'm not suggesting there'd be a major cost to that.
Can I ask a question? What's the, can you compare the IAA and the GAGAS together? Is this a choice that we should make, or is there one that you at your firm typically use?
Well, so we use both. I'm a little partial to GAGAS only because it's government specific, but I have really enjoyed professionally being part of the IAA and using their standards only because you get insight from other industries. It doesn't really affect you though. I think the standards are so similar in the scheme of things, and what really matters, they're saying virtually the same things. If you ask me right now which one I'd recommend, I'd say GAGAS just because it's government oriented and it's going to be more often recognized among local government. But I know plenty of local government shops that use the IA as well.
Karen, would this also be your recommendation?
Yes, I think that Julian's right. I think you're going to have more credibility under GAGAS, or we call it GAGAS, but anyway, same. Because you're in the government space, I think you could be questioned down the road, like, well, why did you go through an internal audit and not use government auditing standards? I don't think there's a downside in that. Do you, Julian, to working under those standards? To
Not
me,
at
it makes
all.
perfect sense as a governmental entity to work under those standards because your financial statements are audited under the same standards. So you get that consistency.
Yeah.
And then just one more, is there any kind of financial cost to the county to use either of these standards?
Well, I mean, so there would be a minor thing we need to do to put together a charter, and I could put a draft of that together and submit it really by our next meeting if you're interested. You need to adopt it. There would be statements of really would lock down our procedures, how we work through the audit, how we're independent, how we function, who we report to. Good practices anyway to have that written down. So there's a little bit of a minor time cost in just getting organized around it. Other than that, I would say no, because we're already operating under these standards as a firm, and it doesn't really change how we do anything. And again, in the absence of the standards, I would be hesitant to call anything we produce an audit report. I would call it, and it's acceptable to call it a study or some other type of document, but calling something an audit without the standards is where the one area I'd pause.
I'll go ahead and make a motion then. I'd like to move to instruct Julian Metcalf to create a charter for GAGAS standards.
And
I'm sorry, and ready at our to be prepared by our next meeting. You're gonna have to
Julian,
say-
do you see that as a one-time document for the county? Or is that part of every engagement letter? In other words, doesn't the engagement letter specify the independence and the standard?
Right. Well, the charter would be one time. It could be revised, of course. And then each engagement would have a letter with really summarizing the details.
Okay.
But the thing that would need to be adopted would be the charter. And that would be one time unless revised in the future.
all right, Julian and Karen, let me check. We've got somebody that just joined us here. I want to see if that is Jacques. Jacques, can you hear us?
Yep, that is me. Sorry, I had difficulty. I'm in rustic area. I had to use my wife's phone.
All right, yeah, I just wanted to make sure we are just had a discussion, Jacques, with the internal auditor. about accepting some auditing standards for his audit moving forward, and Commissioner Martinez has made a motion to accept the GAGAS, which is a governmental standard for that we would fall under as GPP does our internal audits moving forward, and I haven't seconded it. I was going to, and I still can, but I thought I would just kind of fill you in, brief you on where we were with that.
Very much appreciate that. And is that a so that's a common standard that's used in these situations?
It is, and both he and Karen are recommending the government one. There is another one that's more, I think, industry-wide used. But being as we're a government entity, they were recommending this one.
Okay, with their recommendation, I think that sounds like a good idea.
All right,
And-
I will continue then and second Brian's motion and call for a vote. Unless there's further discussion or questions you have, Jacques.
At this point, I don't, but I'm fine with this if it's recommended from these guys.
Okay, thanks. And so I'll call for a vote on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That passes unanimously. And then, Julian, back to your other question, refresh my memory a little bit where.
Yeah, the main category of questions I have is what risk do you see now? I've read about some of the past challenges the county's faced. Not really sure the status on everything, what's been fixed, but what are you looking for? And as I start planning the enterprise risk assessment, what do you see on the horizon?
So I'll go ahead and start. So one of the things that I've noticed coming in here, and just to kind of give you, I'm a new commissioner. This is my first year right here, just started in January. But one thing that I've noticed is that our restricted funds, there hasn't been any strict accounting on that. So for example, we have a reserve fund balance in Fund 23. And on that is it is a set of restricted funds. In there, there's different restrictions. So we can have inside of that one fund, we could have TRT, which is just straight promotion, or we could have TRT 2A, which is rec film and convention, or actually we could also have mitigation funds. And right now I can't get I'm not sure exactly what the balance is inside of that account of each one of those funds. Same way with restricted fund number 47, which is the GCAT fund. Inside of that fund, there are restricted funds, and there's 3 types of restricted funds in there. There should be the grants that have been received. The second is option sales tax. And then the third is the TRT that has been stored inside there. And so it's just trying to figure out what the method is. And it's going to be moving forward, at least with that Fund 23, the TRT, it's going to be even more complicated because we're going to have some new restrictions coming down from new state legislation. And just as we are right now, I don't think that we're doing a good job at recording what is actually being stored inside there. So basically, let's say that $1 of TRT rec film and convention is stamped as TRT rec film and convention. I don't think that dollar is basically continuing through the process. I think it's just being stored inside the TRT, and I'm not sure that there's actually a process for, okay, inside the TRT, there's this amount that's rec film and convention, there's this amount that's promotion, and then there's this amount that's mitigation. Once again, moving forward, we're going to have previous to July 1st, we're going to have a set of restrictions, which was like that. Then after July 1st of this year, we're going to have new restrictions because they further clarified what those funds are. All of that, and then when you look at the state legislation, we're only allowed to have one TRT reserve fund. And there are some other further restrictions on that as far as, you're only allowed to have, I believe, 50% of what you collected the year previous. And so we just need to know what those funds are so that we know how to spend them.
Right.
I think that would be one. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, so it sounds like there's an immediate need just for clarity on information. What's there today? and then potentially recommendations around how to improve it so that you know tomorrow what's there too.
Correct.
Okay.
And then being able to see what those different buckets within that one fund, what those balances are.
Yeah.
So there's I don't know why they're restricting it to one fund, because it seems, in my simple analogy, it would seem that it would be better to have it in each individual bucket, but
Yeah.
at any rate, statute says that there's just one fund and these different funds are kept within there, so it's real hard to maintain an idea of what the balances of each of those are in there. And then the state statute that changed was House Bill 456. And that will go into effect, or it went into effect, as Commissioner Martinez said, July 1. And that bill passed in this year's legislation, if you look it up. And so that's basically the guidelines for all of our TRT money, our TRT tax, which is transient room tax.
Right.
And so all of the hotels and the overnight rentals collect that tax, and then it's distributed in different percentages into different buckets. And I'm sure that as you get into this, Julian, you'll get more familiar with it. It's just the guidelines that we're working under here on that.
You're right.
If I can jump in with a question, I think what's happening is the TRT money comes in, but instead of being kept in one special revenue fund, it's dispersed among other funds. And that's the problem with the tracking, right? Right, Bill, I've got that correct.
Yeah.
And so normally you would have a restricted revenue source coming into what's called a special revenue fund. And then it gets spent for the different purposes. As you were saying, there's a strict promotion, the rec film, right, and convention, maybe the mitigation. Okay, so you would have spending in that category, and then you could have the fund balance broken out. In other words, what's remaining in those different areas. But I think the system that the county is using, whereby you take the money in, but then disperse it among different funds, that's where the confusion comes in. It's very difficult to track accounting wise that way.
Yeah, and it's that tracking right there and getting that system set up so that basically at any time you could say, well, we have this much left in rec film and convention, and there's this much left in the promotion, and there's this much left for mitigation. So that, yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes in, it's actually coming in 3 different buckets? Or for 3 different?
It's not, it's coming in under one bucket, right? It comes in under one bucket and then it needs to be divided out, whether that's divided out as it comes in, or which and I don't know because I haven't looked at the books, or if at the end of the year we take what that total is and then we divide it out at that point, because it's like that 37% can be used for promotion, and of that 37%, 1/5 can be used for rec film and convention of that promotional funds right there. So I don't know if as the TRT comes in monthly, if it's then divided into those buckets, or if they just kind of hold off until the end of the year and then they say, okay, this is what's in the bucket. The problem is it's accounting for that money right there, and then it's also the other side of this was spent right here. This was the rec film and convention that was spent. This was the amount of promotion was spent. And then when it goes back into the reserve account, we should be tagging that right there of saying this is how much rec film and convention is put inside here, and this is how much promotion is put back inside of this reserve account, and this is how much mitigation is put back in. And for all of our restricted funds, but I think starting with Fund 23 and Fund 47, because that's where we're seeing the problems at now, I think that's somewhere where we would like to be going.
Yeah. So in my experience, normally when funds come in that are restricted, they're put into a specific, I'm mixing 2 terms. When dollars come in that are restricted, they are put into their own funds, general ledger funds. And that's the beauty of governmental accounting, because each fund can be for a specific purpose. So at the end, there's no reconciliation to do per se, because all of the revenue and expenditure for a particular purpose. For example, this promotion, 37% of every TRT dollar, it's gone into one fund. All the expenditures have gone into that same fund. And then the ending fund balance is what you have left. So
Yeah.
it doesn't need a recalculation or bucketing at the end because it was done appropriately at the beginning. So they may need to set up some additional special revenue funds to track this TRT money because it sounds like it's getting mixed up between 47 and 23.
Yeah. And then just another question that I would have as well is and it has to do with that as well, under the Fund 47, where the TRT comes in as revenue right there. When I looked at the 2024 amended budget, it was at 566,376. As we were going through our last budget meeting that we had, I guess that number has dropped down to 300 and some change right there. And I just had questions. When the amended budget is posted, are those typically the final numbers, or is there another reconciliation between that and the actuals that'll be posted for 2024?
I guess I'm not quite following the question, but if you had a budget, you're amending the 566, 376 you mentioned, that was a revenue number or an expense?
Yeah, so our opening budget in 2024 was 566, right there for this revenue fund coming in. In 2024, we amended our budget when we accepted the 2025 budget, and that number was still at 566,376. During our most recent budget that we were talking about when we were realigning accounts based on the state auditor's recommendation, that balance was then modified to 300. I could look up the exact number real quick. But
It's fine.
It's 300,000. And I just had questions on when a budget has been amended and posted as the amended budget on the state auditor site. Is that not the final number? Or is there typically a reconciliation again on that number when the actuals are posted? And if there isn't, I mean, I would just think that that's some place that we might want to look into as what are those practices right there?
Sure. Well, I mean, the budget is what we expect to receive and what we expect to spend. The actual is what actually happened at the end. So typically there would be an original budget, right, that is approved. And then there may or may not be amendments throughout the year. If there is an amendment, there's one amendment, you incorporate that amendment, which creates a final budget. Now that's again what we expect to spend. And then there's the actual amounts, what actually happened. Those can be the same or they can be different, right? You might receive more revenue than you expected. Maybe you receive more sales tax or more investment income than you expected. Maybe you spent less than you expected. You would never spend more than you would expected because that's the whole purpose of the budget is to limit the expenditures. I don't know if that helped.
No, it does. Yeah. So basically there can be, so even if the budget was amended in December, between December and when the audit is completed then, or our financials are due, that number could change right there.
Well, normally the budget would not change, that the budget that you have your adopted budget, you get right, because your fiscal end is December. So you have an adopted budget effective January 1. If you needed to make some amendments, throughout the year, that's fine. Then you settle up, say in November, you have your final budget. The budget doesn't move again. Then you have your actual numbers, which may or may not be adjusted for audit adjustments. And then you can compare your actual numbers to the budgeted numbers. But the budget shouldn't be moving around very much. Julian, do you want to add anything to that? I'm not sure if I'm being clear.
Yeah, no, I think you've got it right. I would I'm just trying to put myself in the commission's shoes a little bit and think, well, if you're seeing the budget as your primary planning document, and that's where you're also getting, when you amend it, that is a sense of actuals. It's not actuals at that time. It's just, this is a little bit closer to reality. We know more information now. There is usually a gap between that and the actuals. I would always expect that. You did mention this was revenue, right? And revenue, people, and I'll just say this generally, tend to project that conservatively. And they usually underestimate what will come in because the risk of overestimating is more dire than underestimating. As a general practice, not always. People want it to be right. So the fact that the revenue went down in the projections is a good question about why, but there could be a very good explanation for that, just not knowing enough about the budgeting process and why it would have been revised down. It could have been revised down because looking at economic forecasts saying, oh, we don't know where things are going. Let's be conservative and we'll amend this down. So there could be 100 reasons why. And I don't think it'd be too hard to answer that question. We could look into that a little bit more. I don't know if it's a full audit though. Just it seems like a good question to answer, but it might just be
and I
that
think that
simple.
maybe there's a little bit of confusion with that revenue. So that revenue is coming in under TRT, right? So there was 566,000 that was budgeted to come in to that account via TRT right there. In December, they basically went through and they amended the budget. And I would have thought that our actuals would have been pretty close, you know, if we're going in December of what was spent. And to see something that's $200,000 off of what, $250,000 off, right? Just raised a little bit of questions for me right there.
Okay, so the
Right?
spending was 250 off. That's sorry, I might have misunderstood.
Yeah.
The revenue. Okay, I apologize.
Yeah, we're not, yeah.
Yeah. So the spending was 250,000
Okay.
off there.
Below what was expected.
Below what was expected, and this was done last minute in December, if I remember correctly, when we accepted this amended budget.
Does the council request interim financial statements or maybe not financial statements, but a interim financial report quarterly, something along those lines?
I think that we should.
We've discussed that. We certainly haven't implemented anything.
I think, you know, to Commissioner Martinez's question, you don't want to be surprised at the end of the year, either with significant variances in revenues or expenditures. And either monthly or quarterly reporting budget versus actual, right, would bring this to light. So to your point, if you were expecting 566 a year, 250 more or less, to 280 every 6 months or 140 every quarter, right? You would expect that to track, unless maybe it's seasonal or something, but you would have a normal expectation. And if that number was running significantly lower, then you could ask the question 3 months into the fiscal year, why are we running low compared to the budget on our expenditures? What's happening here? Instead of being surprised at the end of the year with the audit, right? Does that make sense?
Even further in my case, which is 6 months later, we're trying to get these numbers figured. We're trying to get these numbers figured out, and I'm surprised 6 months later after we've had an amended budget in December.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to just jump in. I agree with Karen fully. A quarterly interim report would be a great tool. Surprised you don't have one, just because it's difficult to steer the ship without knowing things on a somewhat recurring basis.
We will certainly work to implement that for sure. We've got our administrator and assistant administrator with us, so I'm sure notes are being taken.
Chairman, can I ask a question?
Sure, and our administrator, Mark, would like to ask a question.
Julian and Karen, what do you see as the main goal of the internal audit? And how does it relate back or complement the external audit?
Well, Administrator, I could speak to my perception of that. I would look to the audit committee for the full direction on it, as I would envision the charter kind of directing the internal audit. But generally, it finds problems before they arise, or at least seeks to put in recommendations that are preventative in that sense. Sometimes,
Is it more financial or internal control
well, I think
directed?
they go hand in hand, in my opinion. I've seen internal audit functions go everything from financial controls and of course performance side as well about are you meeting your policy objectives. It can work in a variety of directions depending on what's needed. Um, Oftentimes controls are at the heart of it because controls speak to the financials and essentially the financials are a way of communicating your resources and what's working and what's not. But in my opinion, controls tend to be the center of things, but not always. I'm hesitating because there's exceptions. There's plenty of exceptions around what risk can be for an entity, because risk can be all encompassing in a lot of other areas, not just financial.
Good with that? Or further?
I was under the impression that it was more to ensure that internal controls were in place. But what you just described is more than that, and seemed like is there any repetitiveness between the financial review of an internal and external?
Hmm. That's a fair question. I'd say there's, of course, when you're looking at finances, there's going to be some overlap. You're going to look at the same books. The goal of internal is to help. I'm thinking big picture. I'm trying to frame this so that I don't stumble my words too much. So forgive me. Um, it is different. So external, I'll start with external. Forgive me. External is really to provide assurance to all of your stakeholders that the financial reports are accurate at the end of the day. They do control assessment, but what really matters is you have a number of stakeholders, the public being the primary one, but then other stakeholders from there that need to rely on your financial reports and that they're accurate. And the external audit says, here are the numbers and we stand behind them. Internal, depending on the direction that an internal audit function is given, is really about managing and identifying and mitigating risk and bringing that forward to the entity internally before problems arise. Internal and external auditors can and often should communicate. Internal auditors have a duty to communicate up to the external auditor and say, hey, these are the risks we're seeing. You might want to take a look at these. And there's some communication that's expected between both parties. But at the end of the day, internal is working for the organization. And if the organization says, this is where we're seeing risk, point us in that direction. We should have enough independence in internal audit to say, well, we're also seeing this. And that's where the objectivity, and I was going on earlier about the audit standards and having that charter in place so that there's a mechanism to say, if you're telling us this, but yes, that's good. We're also seeing this, and raise our hands and be able to say, these are the risks we see as well. So that's where the independence comes in. And so if we're looking at something and we see a risk, we're supposed to elevate that. And so the goal is to find things early before they become problems. And then if there are problems, sort them out and provide recommendations about improvement from an independent and objective standpoint.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry if that was a lot of word soup. I apologize. I'm just thinking on my toes about the best way to describe something that I think about every day, but don't always describe.
Well, Utah is new to me, and we had an internal, I guess it's the equivalent of an internal audit in the state where I came from, but it was provided by the same public agency that provided the external audit.
Hmm,
So it was contained within the same report.
I see. Well, I'm not used to that arrangement. I mean, there's so many different ways of structuring this that I've seen. So that's less common to me. The external audit report will opine on controls when it sees a control deficiency. Um, I would say that the goal with internal audit is to bring those to light before they rise to that occasion and solve them sooner. I mean, if we identify something mid-year, there's a control deficiency, it's very likely that the external audit could also end up opining on it, just because they have a duty to report that, especially if it's not solved right away. But the goal would be surface those issues sooner, find an answer, and then give the commission the opportunity to take direction on our recommendations or not.
Yeah, so it seems that it's a more checks and balances as opposed to a financial report. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, in my opinion. That's not to say that finances aren't a big part of it, but it is functionally different. It's really a tool for the commission and to have independent, objective insight to then uh, take action on that or not as they see appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
I've looked at your, what you've submitted here, Julian, and your audit phase 1 and phase 2. I think those, break it out in pretty good detail for what we're looking at moving forward as well.
I'm glad to hear that. Our approach is really when we've identified an issue or we've been assigned an issue, listen, talk, learn. It's where the phase 1 is a listening phase, to put it simply. Hear from different levels of staff. People have all kinds of insights from different levels, and put that together with a more formal testing plan, and then go rigorously test something using an evidence-based method, and then report on it. And we've done audits that are very financial driven, and then we've done audits that are very policy oriented, where they're asking, is this working? Is this not working? Those are more difficult to answer sometimes, but equally important depending on the scenario.
Very good. And I would then guess here, unless Jacques or Brian, you want to add anything else in that we've really discussed, some direction here for item number 2 of our audit committee meeting today.
And then did we not have a motion at I think the last meeting to where we had provided that direction? I think in a little bit fuller of the departments that we were looking to have gone through. Let me double check the minutes real
Yeah,
quick,
that's where I was just headed.
because I thought that we at our last meeting had.
And commissioners, if I can jump in with one thought.
Please do.
So I was speaking with your staff. I was tentatively planning to come in person to the next meeting in August, if assuming you're holding a meeting at that time. And using that opportunity to meet you folks face to face, which I think is really important. And then speak with staff and maybe use that time to kick off the enterprise risk assessment. And again, learning more about the county, talking to the different departments, take that in-person time to meet with folks and get that feedback so that we can put together the enterprise risk assessment with some more on the ground understanding of how things are structured. Local governments across the country, everyone is pretty unique in how they structure things. So I don't want to go into anything making any assumptions.
And I would think that would be a good time if we have some further direction. I mean, as far as when you get here at that point to kind of lay out the groundwork of where you'll be moving forward, correct?
Yeah,
Unless
I
he
think,
wants more direction ahead of that.
no, I think that would be great if you're comfortable with that timeline. I will have prepared before then the proposed audit committee charter that would
Mhm.
fit under the GAGAS standards, and then use the next meeting in that time to get more specific direction. And then, of course, presumably after that, put together the risk assessment from that meeting. I could start to draft something now, but I think it'd be better to be informed by talking with folks and having that opportunity. And then the subsequent meeting after August would be the risk assessment.
And just so I can understand the timeline, when do we try, are we trying to have the internal audit review completed by?
So the enterprise, so I don't want to throw around too many terms. So the enterprise risk assessment is just an annual activity of looking at risk organization wide and then saying,
Okay.
here are the biggest risks. I think if I had a chance to meet with folks in early August and then do a little bit more digging, and this would just be a high level, here are the key areas we see. And then you could use that to then drive the audit request. Or if you mentioned
Yeah.
the Fund 23 and 47 right now. I mean, there's enough to start with something. It's not informed by the risk assessment, but it'd be enough to just get going on a specific activity, and we could do those in parallel. It doesn't have to wait for the enterprise risk assessment to look at a specific issue.
It seems,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Karen, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add in, it seems to me from the conversations that, I've been a part of, that the TRT funds are the source of many discussions and how they're spent. The structure of how the county is dealing with that income and it's not just how they're spent, but the accounting, and not having those in their own separate funds, I think is something that would, recommendations around that, those processes would be really helpful.
I agree.
And, looking at it by fund, I guess you could ask the question, are the funds for, promotion being properly spent for promotion? That is one question. But I think before you even get to that question, the process by which the
Yeah.
county accounts for that revenue and into which funds it's going, and that to me, that structure is really important. And that I think should be the primary area of focus. Once you get a good system there, you're addressing a lot of other concerns downstream.
And if I could jump in with a technical question, what financial system does the county use, and would we be able to have access to it remotely just to get this kick-started sooner?
Hey, Julian just asked what financial, would you repeat that, Julian?
Yeah, what financial software system does the county use, and would we be able to get remote access to it, read-only remote access, so that we could even just start taking a look and not necessarily rely on folks generating reports for us?
It's Cassell is the software, right?
Yeah, it's Cassell is the software, and I don't want to offer a definitive answer on the read-only access because that would be up to an elected official or auditor, not my realm to answer. But yeah, it is called Cassell. Cassell Clarity is the product we're on right now. It's fairly Utah centric. I don't know how many other states outside of Utah, maybe some southern Idaho, but that's about it. It's fairly Utah centric. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, and
Okay.
we can, after this meeting's over, make that request of the clerk auditor and see if that would be okay.
Would you like a motion for that?
Do we need a motion for it? Sure.
Yeah,
Or,
Actually, we're just gonna seek his,
well, just to have admin go ahead and see if they can, get a read-only access of Excel for the internal auditor.
I'm fine with the motion either way.
Yeah, all right, I'll move to, instruct staff to, request a read-only access for Cassell for the internal auditor.
Do we need a motion for that? Is that right? Sorry.
Well, I think there was some question whether we did or didn't, so Brian just went ahead with it, Jock.
Sure, I'll second then.
All right, I'll call for a vote on that then. All in favor?
Like,
Aye.
Aye. All right, that passes unanimously. I would say then, if we are there any other things, Julian and Karen, before we wrap that portion of it up? And I would say that if anything, maybe now is the time we set that August meeting. While the two of you, are, if you want to weigh in on calendars. Jacques, I don't know if you can look at yours as well.
Yeah, I am able to look at mine on my phone separately. Yeah. I'm pretty good in August. We do have a legislative committee meeting on the 4th. Is that right, Bill?
I see that as well, yeah, at 9 AM.
Maybe doing it if everyone's available after that or so, that would work great. Double up, or when then we have the commission meeting on the 5th.
So what does that look like for you, Julian and Karen, as far as the 4th, say 10:30?
Yeah, I had tentatively held the 4th with this in mind, so the 4th is wide open for you.
good for me. Yeah.
Good.
I am traveling that day, but I don't want Julian is traveling to you, so his schedule is more, is more important than my schedule. So I want to make sure that he's able to, meet with you and be at your convenience. So if that works for the group, then I would sit that meeting out and potentially attend the one in September. I'm sorry, I'm
Okay.
traveling. I'll be out of state that day, and I
Yeah.
just won't be able to tie into a meeting.
But as long as you're fine with that, Julian, then I would say let's set the 4th as our date.
Yeah, I think the 4th would work really well. Coincidentally, I'll be in Salt Lake the week before that, and I can just double up very selfishly, and so that works really well for me. Yeah.
Great.
And
Works
and
for me as
so
well.
then Julian, if you were gonna be doing different interviews and things, even though we've got a meeting prior to the one at 10:30, you could possibly be doing some of your legwork or whatever with other staff and administration here.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
If you wanted to start earlier, I know that we have staff here from 8 o'clock on, so if however that works out for you, I know that you could do before and after the meeting both, but
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah, I will use every opportunity I can there to meet with folks because that time in person is really valuable.
sure. All right, we'll set 10:30 then on the 4th as the next meeting date. And then we'll move on in our agenda unless there's anything that either of you would like to add before we
No, sir.
approve our minutes.
None for me. Thank you all for your
All right.
time.
Yeah, thanks for being with us, and we look forward to meeting you in person.
Thank you, and sorry about my technical difficulties to start the meeting up.
No worries. All right, so then I will move on to the approval of the minutes for the June 13th, 2025 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the meeting of June 13th, 2025.
I'll second.
All right, I will call for a vote on approval of the minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All, that passes unanimously. And we will move on to discussion and consideration of the external auditor RFP. And so I imagine, Karen, there's a little bit here.
Yeah, I sent an RFP template, And then we had to redate it because it didn't get sent out and that issued within the time frame that we had thought it would be. And then has it been sent out? Or where are we on that?
No, Karen, and we need to amend that to add the component units in that as well to give us the opportunity or the option to pay for those audits, or at least partially or full, to be able to try to get those in a more acceptable time frame for us to complete our audits by June 30th.
I don't know if you remember, Karen, but our component units, of which I think there's 5 or 6 of them, their deadline for their audit is the same date as the county's deadline. And so we consistently see them run right up until their deadline date, and then our financials are late. And
Sure.
we have thought about adding into there where we pay for a partial and we then are able to use the same external auditor at the county that would be auditing the component units, so that the county is not continually late every year because of our component units. And it gets
Absolutely.
quite frustrating for not only the commissioners and the audit committee, but also for the clerk auditor. And, there's a lot of pressure put on him. Why aren't the financials ready when it could just simply be our solid waste department or one of the special service districts? I mean, they're very small, and yet because they're waiting right up until the last minute, and a lot of these auditing companies want to get all their tax stuff out of the way and then come in and do these audits. And so it's turned into a real problem for the county, and we're hoping to put some controls around it in this RFP.
Sure. So there's actually 7 component units, but I believe only four of them are audited. The Canyonlands Healthcare Special Service District, the Grand County Recreation Special Service District, the Solid Waste Special Service District 1, and the Grand County EMS SSD. So Thompson, well, you have 3 others. So you also have the Grand County Special Service Water District, the Thompson Special Service District, and the Grand County Transportation Special Service District. But I believe those 3 are not audited. Only,
I think that's correct. With Thompson, it is correct, right? They just submit a report.
So would you like the RFP to include the audit of those 4, or how do you envision this going?
I would think if they weren't audited, whatever they're required to submit, like a financial statement or whatever our external auditor needs from those component units.
So,
And did you mention the recreation?
Yes, she did.
Okay.
so I think, so in the RFP currently is the audit for the county's financial statements. But what I'm hearing you'd like to include is the audit of the 4 component units, which are currently audited.
Correct.
Right. So we don't need to change anything for the other 3. It's just we want to incorporate the audit of the 4 that are currently audited.
And then I think for the other 3, we would need to possibly give them from maybe internally at the county here a deadline that they have a deadline that they've got to meet.
Yes, absolutely. And typically you could, because they're relatively small entities, it would not be unreasonable to ask for an April 15th, April 30th deadline. That gives them more than enough time after year end. And I guess also I would check with your current auditor and see when the non-audited financial statements are have been sent to them in the past. So if they're already sending them in February or March, you want to
That-
stay with that date.
That's not happening for sure.
Okay,
That's
okay.
Also running late. And then one that I didn't hear us mention here, but I know was also part of it was the Moab Valley Fire. And I believe we just pulled theirs off of the state auditor's website, but I believe our external financial auditor is also looking at Moab Valley Fire, and I'm wondering if they should be on this list. Jock, do you have any clarity on that?
They are not a component unit.
Well, we just have to.
So let's see how they're presented.
But yet I know
They're
they.
presented as they're another district. I understand you have a lease with them, but their financials are not presented as component units.
It says our external auditor sent correspondence that just said for documentation purposes, they needed the financials for Moab Valley Fire.
And that may be, apparently there was a bond to provide funding for construction of a fire station.
Time, you got it versus.
You're not a component. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Sure.
How are those component units determined? Like, who is it? The state auditor that determines those, and why, for example, is Thompson not required to submit an audit, but just financial statements? And why is not the Moab Valley Fire considered one of the? I just like to know the process or who does make that determination, if that's known.
The component units are determined by gap. So there's a whole process for determining component units. A lot of it has to do with a control, who appoints the board, who has authority to affect the financials. Are the two units these two entities financially related? And so there's a process that's gone through to determine what entities are component units and which entities are not. And that is specified in the financial statements, and it's going to be after the management discussion and analysis, and I'm going to try to point you to the exact page in the financial statements where you would see that. But it's going to be in the notes, likely part of note 1 of the financial statements. I can confirm that for you. Yeah, note 1 is summary of significant accounting policies, and it discusses the financial reporting entities.
Okay.
And
Thank
Jock,
you.
just to answer on Moab Valley Fire, my guess is because they are elected as we are. we
Right, that
might
makes a
just
lot of
look
sense.
at, we don't have any control over their finances.
And that could change with the annexation, right?
They're still elected.
But if their financials begin to tie in more, well, they're taxing, yeah, I don't know, just thought.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you. That is helpful though.
okay. Yeah, you want to look at note 1A of your financial statements each year, and that discusses the component units.
Thank you,
Okay.
Karen.
Yes, sir.
And do you have enough information to kind of change that RFPP then? An
Okay,
RFP?
yeah, so we want to include the audit of those 4 component units.
Karen,
And
I can send you the listing that Larson had sent me on our component units just to make sure we're all on the same page.
sure, absolutely, that'd be fine. I'm also going to consult the audit report,
Okay.
which in their opinion discusses the component units and who audits those and which ones are not audited due to materiality. They don't need to be audited.
Do we need to have a percentage that the county is looking to fork out for this?
We're considering paying for either a portion or all of these audits in order to control them. Karen, and I don't know how we want to word that in the RFP.
Generally, a responder would expect that if you're issuing the RFP, you'll be paying for the audit. Now, if something is happening in the background where you bill a portion of that audit to the component unit, that's
separate,
it's fine, but that's separate.
right?
And
So
then
the,
my next
the
question-
responder would expect that if you're soliciting an RFP, then you would pay for that.
Agreed. I would agree with that.
And then just my next question then would be, is do we have the authority to require them to use this?
We can't do anything that trumps state law, and as long as that statutory date is June 30th, we can encourage, but we can't.
Well, we can encourage them to use this firm, or can we tell them to use this firm?
No, you can't tell them to.
Yeah.
I think the incentive is by saying we'll pay it, at least a portion,
Got it.
you're doing what you can to encourage them to do that.
Okay, so let's just play this scenario out. We put out the RFP for 4 component units. One component unit's like, no, we're gonna stick with our internal auditor. Does that create a conflict right there? Right, because the RFP went out, this person thinks he's basically gonna have 4 component units, he only gets 3.
It needs to be worded in a way that that's an option, Karen, not a given
Correct, that's,
in the RFP. We need to.
And
read it.
ideally, I think you would want them priced independently,
Mhm. Yeah,
priced
okay.
separately, although, there are efficiencies, right, when you're doing audits. And
Right.
there's efficiencies to be gained, but if you're uncertain as to whether the management of those component units is amenable to this, and you're also uncertain as to whether or not you can force this issue. I mean, generally, if they're blended component units, then you have selection, right, of the governing authority, designation of management. There's a whole list of things that in note 1, that implies that you have significant influence over the operations and accountability for fiscal matters. So I'm not sure about specific Utah state law, but you may be able to exert more control over that than you think. But again, it's not my area of purview. That's not my area of expertise. However, generally, you do have fiscal control and you could force that issue, but ideally you'd want to have cooperation from those component units. And maybe they just have been having trouble finding auditors that can do it timely. It's not that they don't want to. Maybe they're just struggling to find an auditor that is available within your time frame. And you may get more attention by having a larger project.
Okay, anything further? Any other questions, Karen, then on those changes?
So I guess we'll assume that the 4 component units are amenable to this. And we can ask for separate pricing and see what the respondents come back with.
Okay,
And then just on timeline, do we need to have this, when do we need to have this posted by? Are we starting to run against the clock right now?
I think the sooner the better. This is generally the time when auditors would be, thinking about what their year end is going to look like. And normally there would be planning that occurs in the last couple of months of the fiscal year. And so you want to get out ahead of that. So I will,
I'll go ahead and make a motion then.
we'll get this back to you by the next meeting.
Do we have time for the next meeting or should it be posted prior to that? Cause I mean, I feel pretty confident with the RFP, with the changes that we've recommended. So once those changes are recommended, or once those changes are implemented, we can have staff post that.
Okay, okay. Then let me get that back to you in the next week or so. And to whom should I email the revised RFP? To Bill or
Tom
to?
admin, Mark Tyner and Quinn Hall.
Okay. Okay, then I will work on that, to revise the RFP and revise the timeline so that we kind of move up all the dates accordingly.
Okay.
Mark, is that okay for you to
Yeah.
get that posted after it comes in?
Do
Thanks.
we need a motion or we really don't? I don't
They
think.
made a motion.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have a motion then, Jacques, to move that timeline up on the RFP for the external auditor with the component units being a part of that.
Sure, I'll second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Martinez, second by Commissioner Hadler, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes unanimously. And I think then that we can move on to our last item, which is just a little bit of an update from our administrator, Mark Tyner, on the current status of the external audit.
The last email we received was Thursday. And what it says is they are still in need of TRT journal entries, your review of the financials and the draft and any changes that need to be made. And I think that's specifically talking to the clerk auditor's office. Component units, solid waste. They have a draft, but need the final reports, and Chris had indicated last week that they should have those. So if they didn't have them last week, they should have them this week. Grand County Recreation Special Service District, they have the draft, but not the final reports. I do not have an update on that one. Pages 55 and 56 in note 12 needs to be reviewed and updated. And the Moab Valley Fire financials, they are still in need of those for documentation purposes. So that's the items that are still in need to finish up the external audit as of Thursday.
All right. Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, do we wanna send a response back of when we expect this all to be kind of wrapped up? And so that we can possibly get I think we're gonna probably have to have a special meeting set up after this gets done to approve it so that we can get it to the commission and get this off as soon as possible. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that. Or if we're just gonna sit and wait on it and be late.
Do you mean have a
Well-
special meeting before our next commission meeting in order to approve it? Have we, I can't recall, does the commission have to approve that?
I believe so.
Yes,
Yeah, I believe it has
we
to,
had previously anyway, Jacques.
yeah, I believe it has
Okay.
to come. Yeah, it has to come through the audit committee and then it has to go through the commission.
And then it goes to the
Oh.
commission.
Yeah,
What's the jeopardy if we turn it in right after our next commission meeting?
We had that conference call with Seth Overson.
Well, I don't know what the timeline is from the clerk auditor yet at this point, and from Hatterley to even make a decision here. I mean, all we know is that they're waiting. We don't know of a time when this is all coming together.
that's why I was thinking we should get that conversation started right now of, hey, we'd like to get this moved on to the next, either get this moved on to the next commission meeting, or at least make sure that we have plans to have it set for that first August meeting. I'd like to at least know where we're gonna sit at and how late we're gonna be. and at least get a plan together as far as the audit committee goes.
And we're waiting on, we can reach out to the clerk auditor's office and ask them where they are on these and when they expect all that information to be provided to Larson. And then we can follow up with John and ask him how long after he gets that information that he can provide the final report.
Mark, that would be great if you could do that. Thank you.
So then I would say that we possibly will hold a special audit committee meeting just for those financials if it works out, so that our first August commission meeting, we can present those financials at that point. And
Okay.
This will be tentative on Mark. I'm working with the clerk auditor and the Larson's John Hatterley to come up with that date.
Okay.
Yeah, and if sooner better, but if not, I mean, at least knowing that we're gonna
Right.
try to get this in no later than August 1st.
Okay, well, I don't have anything else. Julian, Karen, if you guys have got anything, if not, I'm gonna adjourn the meeting. Look forward to seeing you in. I don't even remember our date, Julian. We already had it. August 4th. Good thing I take notes. Memory's gone. All right, thank you, both of you. We appreciate your help and your attendance and everything we've got going here.
Great, super nice to see you all.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you. With that, I'll adjourn this meeting at 10:16 on Monday, the 7th of July. Thanks, everybody.
All right.